So what if I told you that depending on the language you happen to be speaking right now, your personality is fundamentally measurably different?
Like a completely different person.
Exactly. That your English-speaking self might literally be a louder or, more assertive, maybe even a more aggressive person than your Spanish-speaking or Japanese-speaking self.
It's a wild thought, right? Because we really like to think of our identity as this solid, unchanging core.
Right, like a fixed thing. But what if it's actually fluid, shifting not just based on where we live, but, on the very syllables coming out of our mouths?
It's fascinating.
Really. So keep that in the back of your mind for a second. Now, I want you to imagine this. You're at a dinner party.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, it's a lovely evening. The lighting is just right. The ambient chatter is pleasant. And you're standing in the kitchen holding a glass of wine or maybe sparkling water, and you're introduced to someone new. They smile, they shake your hand, and then they ask you a question. It's a question so standard, so deeply ingrained in our social scripts, that for most people, the answer is an absolute reflex. The question is simply, where are you from?
Yeah. 5 totally innocuous syllables. Basically the ultimate conversational icebreaker.
Right. And I mean, if you've lived in the same town your whole life, or maybe just moved once or twice within your own state, you don't even blank. You just say the name of the city and the conversation flows right along.
Totally. It's effortless.
But for a massive and growing demographic of people, expats, international students, global nomads, folks who have crossed borders and oceans to build a life, those 5 syllables are the mental equivalent of hitting a brick wall.
Oh, absolutely. It induces this sudden internal panic, like a very visible hesitation.
You literally freeze. Your brain starts calculating all these variables at lightning speed. You're thinking, do they mean where was I born? Do they mean where I pay rent right now?
Or where I spent my formative years, right?
Exactly. What if I've lived in 4 different countries in the last decade? Which coordinate on the global map actually encapsulates the narrative of my existence. It's no longer a simple geographical coordinate.
No, not at all. It is a highly complex, sometimes profoundly hesitation-inducing narrative.
Yeah.
What happens in that momentary pause is a collision, really.
A collision between what?
It's a collision between our traditional, rigid definitions of origin and the incredibly fluid reality of a modern, globalized life.
And that collision is exactly what we are getting into today. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the psychology of home and the expat experience.
It's such a rich topic.
It is. We're unpacking why a word like home, which is, a word we learn in our very first week of studying any new language, a concept a toddler understands, becomes incredibly nebulous and emotionally difficult to define the more we experience of the world.
Yeah, and over the course of this deep dive, we'll trace a very specific and I think highly relatable journey. We'll start by moving away from the physical definition of home and into the emotional definition.
Which is a huge shift in perspective.
Right. And from there, we'll explore the jarring, often really painful realities of reverse culture shock. Then we'll get into that linguistic theory you teased at the beginning, how learning a new language might actually construct an entirely separate second self.
I am so excited for that part.
It's mind-bending. And finally, we'll look at how people resolve this whole existential dilemma by learning to literally carry their home with them.
I can't wait to get into the language part, but let's start at the beginning. The geography of emotion. It's really fascinating how our default setting as human beings is to think of home strictly in terms of bricks and mortar.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's a physical structure, it's a mailing address, it's a roof.
Which is a perfectly natural default when you consider human history, right? I mean, for centuries, for the vast majority of our existence, home was intrinsically linked to a physical, unmoving plot of land.
Right, it was very agricultural.
Exactly. It was agricultural, it was ancestral, you lived where your grandparents lived, and you farmed the soil they farmed. The physical structure and the concept of home were basically indistinguishable.
But psychologically speaking, the reality of home is entirely different, isn't it?
Oh, completely. Psychology defines home not as a place, but as an emotional state.
So it's not the walls, but the feeling within the walls.
Precisely. The core components of this emotional state are security, familiarity, and a deep sense of belonging. The bricks and mortar are really just the container for those feelings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and when you strip away the container, like when you leave the house, the human need for those 3 pillars remains entirely intact.
So what does that mean for someone who decides to, pack up their life and move across the world. I keep picturing an astronaut, actually.
An astronaut? How so?
Well, think about an astronaut going on a spacewalk. They have that thick white tether connecting their suit to the space station, right? That tether provides their oxygen, their communication, their physical anchor, so they don't just drift off into the absolute void.
Right, it's their lifeline.
Exactly. And moving abroad feels like willingly unhooking that tether. You literally become untethered. You're just floating without an emotional anchor. And frankly, the sensory deprivation of losing that anchor sounds terrifying.
It is terrifying. It's a massive psychological shock because when you move abroad, you sever those immediate geographical ties that have traditionally provided your sense of security and familiarity.
You just willfully cut the cord.
You do. And that leads to an incredibly complex psychological situation known as the expat paradox, or sometimes it's called the double displacement.
Double displacement. Let's break that down because I think it's crucial for understanding this whole modern global citizen identity. The expat paradox is the phenomenon where you naturally feel like a foreigner in your new country, which is totally expected. I mean, you literally just arrived.
Right. That's just culture shock.
Exactly. But the paradox kicks in when you eventually return to your old country, your place of origin, and discover that you now feel like a foreigner there too.
A foreigner everywhere, a local nowhere. You're just caught between two worlds, not fully belonging to either.
Wait, let me push back on this for a second, though. Is this expat paradox just like a highly privileged problem?
What do you mean?
Well, we're talking about people moving for expansion, for new jobs, for adventure, but most people throughout human history didn't move for self-actualization.
Right.
They moved for survival.
That's a very fair point.
Yeah, they were refugees, forced migrants, people fleeing famine or war. Does this double displacement framework still apply to them, or is this really just a wealthy digital nomad issue?
That's a really vital distinction to make. The circumstances of the move absolutely dictate the level of trauma involved.
Right.
A forced migrant's experience is layered with immense trauma, loss, and often a total inability to ever return, which obviously changes the dynamic entirely compared to, say, a corporate expat.
Right, the stakes are completely different.
They are. However, the underlying psychological mechanism, the untethering from a familiar environment, and the subsequent cognitive rewiring required to survive in a new one is a universal human biological process.
Oh, interesting. So the brain responds similarly.
Exactly. The brain of a refugee and the brain of an expat both have to adapt to new linguistic, cultural, and geographic realities to survive. The grief of losing the original home state and the dissonance of changing identities applies across the entire spectrum of human displacement.
Okay, that makes sense. So the biological hardware is doing the exact same thing, even if the software, the context of the move is totally different.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's look at the subtle mechanics of how this drifting actually happens then. Because it's not an overnight thing, right? You don't just wake up one morning and realize you're doubly displaced.
No, it's incredibly gradual. It is rooted deeply in the mundane details of adapting to a new life.
The mundane details.
Yeah, the mundane details are exactly where the real psychological shift occurs.
So, think about learning a new subway system. Let's say you move to Tokyo or London. When you first arrive, the transit map looks like absolute spaghetti.
Total chaos.
You're constantly checking your phone, you're sweating at the ticket gate, you're just stressed. But eventually you adapt. You learn this system. You know exactly where to stand on the platform so the doors open right in front of you.
You find a new favorite cafe.
Exactly. You know the barista's name. You adopt the local rhythm. You are actively syncing up with your new environment.
And that concept of syncing is the precise mechanism behind the expat paradox. If we look at the why behind this phenomenon, it really comes down to a zero-sum game of cultural rhythm and cognitive load.
A zero-sum game.
Yeah. Human beings are incredibly adaptable creatures. We are designed to find the rhythm of our environment and sync our internal metronome to it. It's a survival mechanism.
Sure.
But the act of syncing with a new rhythm in, say, London inherently and inevitably means you are falling out of sync with the rhythm of your place of origin.
Because you literally can't be synced to two completely different metronomes at the exact same time.
Precisely. Let's look at the neuroscience of this for a second. Your brain only has so much bandwidth for implicit, automatic cultural knowledge.
Right, the subconscious stuff.
Exactly. It's all about synaptic pruning and neuroplasticity. While you are busy learning the intricacies of the London Underground or adapting to the conversational pacing of a British pub, your brain is actively forming new neural pathways.
Okay.
And to make those new pathways efficient, it actively prunes or weakens the older, less used pathways.
So it's basically an energy-saving mechanism?
It is. The brain is an absolute energy hog. It doesn't want to maintain the complex subconscious neural maps of your old hometown's bus routes or the highly specific social nuances of your old neighborhood if you aren't using them every single day.
Wow.
So those older pathways begin to atrophy. You are drifting. And the insidious part is that you really don't notice the drifting while it's happening because your conscious focus is entirely on surviving and thriving in the new place.
Right, you're just proud of yourself for finally understanding how to order a coffee without sounding like an idiot. You don't realize that the biological cost of that new knowledge is a subtle severing of your old familiarities.
Exactly.
You're trading one set of subconscious reflexes for another, but the loss is totally silent.
Until you try to go back.
Right. Which brings us to a massive, jarring collision. If syncing with a new city pulls us out of sync with our origins, what exactly happens when we try to rewind the clock?
The real test.
Yeah. What happens when we pack our bags, hop on a flight, and go back to where we started? This brings us to the dissonance of return.
The phenomenon commonly referred to as reverse culture shock. And in many ways, honestly, it is much more destabilizing than the initial culture shock of moving abroad.
Because it violates our expectations so deeply, right?
Right.
I mean, think about the narrative we build in our heads. You return to your hometown after years of living abroad. You're expecting this whole hero journey conclusion.
A triumphant homecoming.
Yes. You've been out in the world. You've conquered the subway systems of major metropolises. You are returning with stories and newfound wisdom. You basically expect the swelling musical score, the warm embraces, the profound sense of slotting right back into your perfectly shaped hole in the universe.
The expectation is seamless reintegration. You fully expect the emotional state of home, that deep security and familiarity to just wash over you the moment you cross the city limits.
But instead of a triumphant return, you are met with this profound, heavy sense of dissonance. It is a deeply unsettling psychological reality.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that cognitive dissonance because it's important. Cognitive dissonance occurs when our deeply held expectations violently clash with reality, right? And then our brain just scrambles to resolve the contradiction.
Right.
In this specific scenario, the physical environment of the hometown remains static. The bricks and mortar haven't moved. The streets are the same. The houses look the same. The geography is basically identical to the map you hold in your memory.
Okay, so the container is exactly the same.
Yes. Yet, there is a very specific, almost universal sensation expats report. The hometown feels inexplicably smaller.
Smaller. It's such a visceral description. But here's the thing. The town didn't physically shrink.
No, of course not.
The expat expanded. I like to think of it like trying to put on a beloved childhood winter coat.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. You find it in the attic, and it's the exact same coat you loved when you were 10 years old. The fabric hasn't changed, the buttons are all the same, but when you try to put it on, you literally can't even get your arms through the sleeves.
Exactly. The coat hasn't shrunk, the person has grown. The expat has expanded their worldview, their threshold for novelty, their basic understanding of what is possible. They've accumulated entirely new cultural operating systems.
So the town feels smaller because your internal scale has gotten so much bigger. The coat hasn't changed, but you have outgrown it.
And the painful part is that this outgrowing leads to a feeling of being excluded from a place that was once inherently yours. You're basically locked out of your own history.
Man, that's heavy. And, if you're listening to this and you've never moved abroad, you've probably still experienced a micro version of this reverse culture shock.
Oh, absolutely. Almost everyone has.
Just going back to your parents' house for Thanksgiving after your first year of college.
Yes, the classic example.
I've been living on your own, setting your own schedule, expanding your mind, and suddenly you walk back through your childhood front door and you're treated like a 16-year-old again.
Right, the dynamic just snaps back.
The house feels weird, the dynamic feels stifling, and you feel this deep disconnect. It's that exact same dissonance, just on a smaller scale.
And that exclusion is most acutely felt, not in the geography, but in the interpersonal relationships.
Oh, for sure.
The real pain point that triggers this cognitive dissonance is sitting down with old friends and realizing they're still having the exact same conversations they were having 3 years ago.
Yes. That is such a devastating realization. You sit down at the table, expecting to connect on this deep, profound level, and you realize the narrative loop of their life just hasn't progressed.
Or at least it hasn't progressed in a way that includes your new worldview.
Exactly. You want to talk about the profound internal shifts you've experienced, the wild things you've seen, and they are discussing the exact same local politics, the same neighborhood gossip, the same petty grievances from before you even left.
It creates an immediate, palpable divide. It highlights the divergence in your paths.
Okay.
While you were away navigating the expat paradox, untethering yourself, and experiencing rapid neuroplastic adaptation, they remained anchored.
Right, they stayed put.
Their neural pathways regarding their environment were continually reinforced, not pruned. And it's crucial to note that neither path is inherently superior.
Right. We absolutely aren't passing moral judgment on the people who stayed. Staying requires its own kind of resilience and community building.
Yes, exactly. It is simply an objective observation of the psychological divide. But this divide completely shatters the illusion we build while we are away.
The illusion.
And this brings us to the psychology of nostalgia, which plays a massive, often very deceptive role in reverse culture shock.
The famous rose-colored glasses. Our memory totally betrays us when we are homesick, doesn't it?
It really does. It's highly selective.
Because while we are away, floating around untethered, dealing with the stress of a foreign environment, we naturally crave that emotional baseline of security. So we actively curate our memories.
We filter out the bad parts.
We remember the comfort of our childhood bedroom, the smell of a specific holiday meal, the warmth of a summer evening with friends. But we conveniently, almost subconsciously, forget the profound boredom, the limitations, or the deep frustrations that actively motivated us to pack our bags and leave in the first place.
Nostalgia is essentially an evolutionary defense mechanism. It's a highly aggressive editor. It cuts the negative footage and leaves only the highlight reel.
The highlight reel, yeah.
When you are stressed in a new environment, your brain uses nostalgia to basically soothe you. It manufactures a feeling of safety by idealizing the past. But the danger of nostalgia is that it sets an absolutely impossible standard for reality.
Because you are homesick for a place that only exists in the edited cinematic movie version in your mind.
Exactly.
So when you actually step off the plane and go back, you are confronted with the unedited director's cut of your hometown. The boredom is still there.
Yeah.
The frustrations are still there. The static conversations are still there. And that realization just hits you like a freight train.
It leads to a tragic yet profoundly necessary psychological realization: you can never go home again.
You can never go home again. It's such a heavy phrase. And it's not because the physical town was bulldozed. The town is still there. The childhood coat is still in the attic.
Right.
You can never go home again because the person who lived there, the person who fit perfectly into that environment and those specific conversations literally no longer exists.
That is the crux of it. It's the death of the old self. The act of leaving, of expanding, of surviving the double displacement fundamentally alters your psychological makeup. The you that belonged to that geography has been overwritten by the you that navigated the new world.
And trying to force the new you into the old environment is what causes the profound dissonance?
Yes. It is a genuine grieving process. You are mourning the loss of a version of yourself that felt perfectly safe and perfectly secure. It's essentially the emotional cost of admission to the wider world.
Okay, so if we accept this premise that our physical environment, our experiences radically change who we are, it brings up an incredibly fascinating question.
Where are we going with this?
Well, if changing our city changes our identity, what happens when we change the very tools we use to process the world? What happens when we change the words we use to think and speak?
Ah, yes. We are moving from the geography of emotion to the architecture of thought. This takes us directly into the realm of linguistic relativity.
Okay, here is where it gets absolutely mind-bending. There's a linguistic theory loosely related to the famous Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that suggests we actually develop completely different personalities in different languages.
Let's ground the listener in what the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis actually is, because it's foundational here. The broad idea of Sapir-Whorf is that the structure of a language influences its speaker's worldview or cognition.
Basically, the language you speak dictates how you perceive reality.
Right.
And to understand how wild this is, we really have to look at some classic examples, like gendered nouns.
Oh, that's a great example.
In German, the word for bridge is feminine. In Spanish, the word for bridge is masculine.
Okay.
Studies have shown that if you ask a German speaker to describe a bridge, they're more likely to use words like beautiful, elegant, or fragile. But if you ask a Spanish speaker to describe a bridge, they'll use words like strong, sturdy, or towering. The grammar of the language literally shapes how they perceive the physical object.
Yes, and another brilliant example is spatial orientation. There is an indigenous Australian community that speaks a language called Gugu Yimithir.
I've heard of this.
It's amazing. They do not use relative directional terms like left or right. They use absolute cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. So instead of saying there's a bug on your left leg, they would say there's a bug on your southwest leg.
That is wild. Which means from the time they are toddlers, their brains are forced to constantly subconsciously track where true north is, just to be able to speak basic sentences.
Exactly. They have a perfect innate sense of spatial awareness that English speakers simply don't have, entirely because of their language.
So if language can dictate how you view a bridge or how you navigate a forest, the theory we are exploring takes it a step further into the realm of personality.
It suggests we are not just talking about translating vocabulary from, say, Spanish to English. We are talking about translating the self.
Translating the self.
If we look at the mechanics of this identity shift, especially for advanced language learners, those operating at a near fluent, C2 proficiency level, the process of speaking a new language is no longer just a cognitive translation exercise.
Right.
It becomes the active construction of an entirely new identity. It's creating a second self.
A second self. I mean, it sounds like a sci-fi concept, but anyone who speaks a second language fluently knows exactly what this feels like.
Definitely.
Let's look at a specific dynamic, like the difference between speaking French and English. You might have someone who feels highly analytical, polite, and perhaps a bit reserved when they're speaking English.
Okay.
But when they switch to French, they transform into an entirely different persona. They describe feeling more direct, more emotional, and surprisingly, noticeably louder.
Louder. That's such a fascinating detail.
Right. Why does that happen? Why would changing the grammar and vocabulary you are using suddenly turn up the volume and the assertiveness of your personality?
Well, we have to look at the constraints of the second language. When you are operating in a language that is not your native tongue, even at a very advanced level, you often have a more limited vocabulary.
Right. You don't know every single word.
Exactly. You do not have the vast, nuanced reservoir of synonyms and subtle phrasing that you possess in your first language. Because your vocabulary is restricted, you are forced to be more direct.
You just have to say what you mean.
Yes, you can't dance around a subject with flowery prose or highly nuanced passive-aggressiveness. You have to hit the nail on the head.
You have to get straight to the point because you literally don't have the linguistic luxury of beating around the bush.
Yes, and that directness often comes across as more emotional or more assertive. Furthermore, when you are concentrating on forming the words, and perhaps slightly less confident in your pronunciation, you might naturally project your voice more to ensure you are understood.
Oh, so that leads to the perception of being louder.
Exactly. But there is a much deeper psychological layer to this beyond just vocabulary constraints.
Yeah, I think about it like playing a character on a stage. When you are an actor on a stage wearing a costume, you give yourself permission to do things you would never do in your own living room, right?
That's a great way to look at it.
You drop your inhibitions because it's not you doing it, it's the character. Speaking a second language, especially before it becomes completely innate, provides a psychological buffer.
The linguistic costume gives you distance from your own actions.
Think about profanity. This perfectly illustrates the buffer. Why does swearing feel so much less offensive when you say it in a second language?
It really does.
Right. If you drop a massive curse word in your native tongue, you feel the weight of it. You feel the physical reaction in your gut. You feel the history of being scolded by your parents or teachers for saying it when you were 7 years old.
Yes.
But in a second language, it's just a sequence of sounds you learned as an adult.
You lack the emotional, historical attachment to the words. In your native language, every word is deeply entangled with childhood memories, cultural taboos, and lifelong social conditioning.
It's all connected.
The words are anchored in your limbic system, the emotional center of the brain. In your second language, those words were likely acquired in a classroom or from a textbook or in an adult social setting.
So they're just data.
Right. They carry intellectual meaning, but they lack that visceral emotional weight.
And because you don't have the emotional weight holding you down, your inhibitions drop. This linguistic detachment allows you to actively experiment with a bolder, less inhibited persona.
It's freeing.
Your second self can literally be braver than your primary self. Your second self can flirt more easily or argue more assertively or complain to a waiter without feeling crushing guilt because the words literally do not sting as much.
The second self is essentially a liberated version of the individual, operating under a different set of cultural and linguistic rules, but we must also consider the profound cost of this liberation.
The cost, right?
There's a critical concept here regarding the toll this takes on the individual, concept of bifurcation.
Bifurcation,
Yeah.
splitting into two branches.
Exactly. You are effectively splitting your identity into two distinct branches. You are running two separate cultural operating systems simultaneously.
Instead of the old Mac versus Windows analogy, which doesn't really capture the active effort involved, I think of it like driving a car.
Okay, let's hear it.
Your native language is like driving an automatic transmission car in your home country. You don't think about it, you just steer.
Right.
But your second language is like driving a manual transmission car in a country that drives on the opposite side of the road.
That is a much more accurate metaphor.
You have to consciously think about the clutch, shifting gears, looking the opposite way before turning. You have to constantly suppress your automatic reflexes.
And just like driving that manual car in a foreign country is physically and mentally exhausting, maintaining this bifurcation of identity requires immense, often unacknowledged, mental taxation.
It's just exhausting.
Think about the cognitive load. Depending on which language you are speaking, your second self might need to value totally different things.
Like what?
Well, in one cultural operating system, say Japanese, the highest value might be extreme politeness, reading the room, and indirectness. In the other, say American English, the highest value might be directness, self-promotion, and assertiveness.
So you are not just translating words, you are constantly translating your values and your reactions in real time.
Exactly.
If someone cuts you off in traffic, your English-speaking self might react one way, while your French-speaking self might react entirely differently. You have to constantly monitor your behavior and ask yourself subconsciously, which set of cultural rules am I playing by right now?
That constant switching, that perpetual monitoring of which persona is at the forefront is profoundly exhausting.
I can imagine.
It is a hidden fatigue that many expats and multilingual individuals carry with them every single day. They're constantly navigating not just the external world, the new subway systems and coffee shops, but the internal divide between their bifurcated selves.
Which brings us back to the core dilemma of this entire discussion. If we accept this reality that our identity is literally split across different languages, that maintaining these operating systems is exhausting, and that our physical home is no longer a static spot on a map that we can confidently return to, how on earth do we keep from floating away entirely?
That's a huge question.
If the astronaut's tether is cut, and they're floating, and now we are saying their very identity is split, how do they find their grounding? Where is the anchor?
That is the existential question that the expat experience forces you to answer. When the external structures of home and identity are dismantled, the only remaining option is to construct an internal structure.
Right.
We have to completely rewrite the definition of what a home is. The modern solution to this, the paradigm shift, is that for the global citizen, home must become portable.
A portable home.
A portable definition of home is the only framework that can survive the realities of global mobility and linguistic bifurcation. If home is a fixed geographical location, you will always be in a state of mourning, a state of double displacement.
Because you're always away from it.
Exactly. But by making it portable, you reclaim agency over your own psychological security.
So what does a portable home look like in practice? It means home is no longer bricks and mortar. It's no longer a zip code.
No.
Instead, home becomes the people you love. It becomes the specific daily rituals you keep. And fundamentally, it becomes the internal peace you manage to cultivate, regardless of what country you are standing in.
I love the specific visual image often used for this. Carrying your home on your back like a snail. It's a portable sanctuary.
The snail is a brilliant metaphor because it implies that the protection, the comfort, and the essential essence of the creature are inseparable from the creature itself. Wherever the snail goes, it is, by definition, home.
Think about how incredibly liberating that concept is.
It really is.
If your home is your rituals, maybe it's the highly specific way you make your pour-over coffee every single morning, regardless of whether you are in Tokyo, Paris, or New York. Maybe it's a weekly Sunday video call with your best friend. If your home is your internal peace, it completely frees you from the desperate need to belong to a single patch of soil. You don't have to force yourself to fit back into the childhood winter coat. You are allowed to belong to the entire world. Or, more accurately, you can simply belong to yourself.
It is a deeply empowering philosophy. It aligns very closely with Stoicism, right? The idea that our security and our peace must be derived from our internal state, which we control, rather than external circumstances and geography, which we do not.
Yes.
It sounds like the perfect, rational, bulletproof solution to the expat paradox.
Yes, but.
There's always a but.
There's always a but. When we try to apply pure rational philosophy to messy human biology,
Right.
while the portable sanctuary is a beautifully stoic philosophy, human beings are not purely rational stoic entities. We are biological creatures, deeply and inextricably tied to our nervous systems, our evolutionary hardware, and our senses.
We can philosophize all day long about how home is an internal state of peace, but then something completely random happens that bypasses all our high-level logic and hits us right in the gut.
And this brings us to the final and perhaps most poignant concept in our deep dive, the raw, undeniable power of sensory nostalgia.
Sensory nostalgia.
Philosophy constructs the portable sanctuary, but sensory details are the anchors that occasionally and forcefully drag us back to our origins.
It's not about missing the physical town, right? It's about missing the specific inputs your brain was wired to receive when you were young.
Exactly.
People describe these incredibly mundane anchors that possess this profound power. They talk about a specific brand of cheap tea bags from childhood, the smell of rain hitting the hot asphalt in their home state, the exact, unreplicable texture and taste of a specific type of bread from their local bakery.
These examples perfectly illustrate why sensory details often hold significantly more emotional weight than the actual physical geography of a country.
Let's look at the neuroanatomy of why this happens, because it's fascinating.
Oh, please do. Our olfactory system, our sense of smell, and our gustatory system taste are wired entirely differently than our other senses.
How so?
When you see something or hear something, that sensory information goes to the thalamus, which acts like a switchboard, and then it's routed to the cerebral cortex, the logical thinking part of your brain for processing.
Okay, so sight and sound go through logic first.
Right. But smell and taste bypass the thalamus completely. The olfactory bulb has direct, unmediated neural pathways to the amygdala and the hippocampus.
And the amygdala and hippocampus are...
The amygdala is the core center for processing emotion, and the hippocampus is responsible for associative learning and memory. Together, they form a major part of the limbic system, the ancient, primitive center of the brain.
So when you smell that specific rain on the asphalt, the information doesn't go to the logical, philosophical part of your brain first. It doesn't ask your rational second self for permission to feel something.
Precisely. It bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely. It bypasses your constructed expat identity, your linguistic bifurcation, and your carefully curated stoic philosophies.
Wow.
It mainlines directly into the emotional core of your brain, instantly triggering the deeply buried feelings of security and familiarity that we defined as the true essence of home at the very beginning of this deep dive.
It's literally a biological override. It's
Yeah.
a Proustian moment. You could be sitting in a sleek cafe in London, feeling totally confident in your constructed, assertive English-speaking persona, happily carrying your portable sanctuary on your back,
okay.
and then you catch a whiff of a specific cleaning product or take a sip of very specific tea. And suddenly you are 10 years old again. You're sitting in your mother's kitchen, and the wave of homesickness is so intense it takes your breath away.
Because in that fleeting sensory moment, the biological memory of home is infinitely more real and powerful than the philosophical construct of your current reality. A specific brand of tea bags or the texture of a certain bread becomes a literal time machine.
It proves that while we can cut the physical tether, the biological and emotional imprints of our origins are practically indelible.
It is both beautiful and a little bit heartbreaking.
It really is. We build these massive, complex lives across the globe. We learn new languages. We rewire our brains. We become entirely new people. And yet, a piece of bread can bring us to our knees.
It highlights the beautiful complexity of the human experience. We are capable of profound neuroplastic adaptation and expansion, yet we remain deeply tethered to the fundamental sensory experiences that first signaled safety to our developing brains.
Man. Let's take a breath and look back at the immense ground we have covered today.
We started by dismantling the physical definition of home and recognizing it as an emotional state of security.
Right.
We examined the physical and emotional displacement of the expat paradox, where syncing with a new culture inherently forces your brain to prune the pathways of your old one.
Then we looked at the painful dissonance of returning to a static past, the reverse culture shock, the shrinking hometown, the Thanksgiving microculture shock, and the realization that the old self is dead.
We then explored the architecture of thought, detailing how linguistic relativity and advanced language acquisition can construct a second self, leading to the exhaustion of maintaining a bifurcated identity.
And finally, we looked at how we survive all of this by building a portable sanctuary, even as our biology constantly reminds us of our origins through the sheer power of sensory nostalgia.
It's a delicate balancing act between the roots that ground us and the wings that allow us to explore.
It really is. So after unpacking all of this, I want to turn directly to you, the listener. If you speak a second language, when you switch languages, do you feel the shift?
Do you feel like a fundamentally different person with different values and different inhibitions when you speak English compared to your native tongue?
And perhaps more importantly, in light of this entire discussion, how are you defining your sanctuary today? Is your home tethered to the geography of where you were born, or is it simply where you perform your daily rituals?
It's something we all have to answer for ourselves as we navigate this world.
It is. But I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We have established that speaking a new language actively constructs a completely different second self, with its own unique personality, its own volume, its own levels of assertiveness.
Right.
And we have established that we need to build a portable sanctuary to survive the modern expat experience. So which of yourselves is actually the one deciding where to put down that portable sanctuary?
Oh, that is a fascinating question.
If your English self values different things than your French self or your Spanish self, do your different linguistic personalities have totally different definitions of what home even looks like?
Does your native self want the childhood tea bags, while your second self just wants the familiar rhythm of the new subway system?
Yeah.
Exactly. Who is really driving the snail shell? Something to think about. Until next time. Imagine waking up one morning, pouring your coffee, and realizing something completely absurd about your life.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
Yeah, you look at your phone and you realize you have 50 close friends scattered across 6 different continents.
Right? A totally global network.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you have people you could call at 3 in the morning in Berlin or Tokyo or Buenos Aires. People who know your absolute deepest secrets.
But then you look around your actual kitchen.
Right. You stand there in your kitchen and it hits you that you don't know a single person in your current physical city who you could call to, like, help you move a couch.
Yeah, it's a really jarring realization.
It really is. You're simultaneously deeply connected to the world and completely physically isolated in your own neighborhood.
And honestly, it's a remarkably common feeling for a very specific demographic of people. You look at your contacts and see a map of the globe, but you look out your window and see total strangers.
Exactly. And usually when we talk about human connection, we use this very static language.
Right, like putting down roots.
Yes, we talk about putting down roots or building a foundation. It all sounds like architecture.
Very permanent architecture.
Right. But what happens when you take that architecture, rip it out of the ground, and just put it on a plane?
That is the big question.
So today, we are going on a deep dive into the psychological and social architecture of belonging.
Which is such a fascinating topic.
It really is. We're looking at what actually happens to our brains, to our relationships, and really our very concept of who we are when we leave our geographic origins behind.
Because it's a profound rewiring. Moving away from home, whether that means crossing an ocean or just, moving a few states away, isn't just a physical change of address.
It's not just updating your postal code.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's not this simple administrative task of getting a new driver's license. It actually triggers a fundamental neurological overhaul of how we interact with others.
Wow, an overhaul.
Yeah, it changes how we establish trust, how we gauge threats in our environment, and ultimately how we perceive our own identity in relation to everyone else.
So for you listening right now, The learner who might be, I don't know, folding laundry or commuting to a job in a city you literally just moved to.
Or maybe just staring at a map on your wall.
Yeah, just wondering what it would be like to pack up everything and leave. This deep dive is going to give you a roadmap.
It definitely will.
Because whether you are currently preparing for a massive cross-country relocation, or whether you've ever gone back to your childhood hometown for the holidays and felt like a total stranger walking through your own memories.
That is such a common experience.
Right. Or if you just want to understand the extreme psychology of human connection under pressure, this is for you. The material we're exploring today provides this incredibly lucid framework for those really hard to describe feelings.
We are going to give you the exact vocabulary you've been looking for.
And that vocabulary is going to be so crucial, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because the mission of our discussion today is to unpack the entire emotional life cycle of displacement. We're going to trace the whole arc.
Starting right at the beginning.
Exactly. We'll start with the intense, almost manic beginnings of new friendships in unfamiliar places.
And then we go into the harder stuff.
Right. We'll move through the profound, aching melancholy of what it actually means to be homesick. And ultimately, we are going to arrive at a totally new paradigm.
A new way of looking at it all.
Yes. We'll look at how we can fundamentally redefine the concept of stability in a world that is highly mobile, increasingly transient, and, constantly shifting under our feet.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand how belonging works when you're on the move, we first have to look at the people.
The actual human beings.
Right, the people who populate this new world when someone moves. Because when you cross a border, or even just cross a state line, you aren't just entering a new geography.
You are entering a totally new social ecosystem.
You really are, and I want to get into the dynamics of that ecosystem.
Well, the core dynamic of that space is what the sources call the revolving door.
The revolving door, that's a great image.
It is. When you enter an expat community, an international hub, a university town, or even just a highly transient urban center like New York or London.
Basically anywhere with high turnover.
Exactly. You are stepping into a social environment that is fundamentally defined by motion. It is not static. It is this constant, unending state of arrivals and departures.
A revolving door. That is such a visceral, slightly exhausting image, honestly.
Yeah, it really is exhausting.
You're standing in the lobby of your new life, and people are just spinning in and out. You barely catch their eye before they're gone again.
Think about it in contrast to human history. In a traditional static community, say, a small village where multiple generations of families have lived on the exact same street.
Right, where everyone knows everyone.
Yeah, relationships in that setting are built over decades, sometimes over centuries, through family ties. Trust is established incrementally in these tiny microtransactions over years.
Like, you know the baker, and your dad knew the baker's dad.
Precisely. But in this revolving door environment, the primary characteristic of the social dynamic is transience. Everyone knows, either consciously or subconsciously, that the people around them are temporary.
And that ticking clock completely changes the rules of engagement.
It throws the rule book out the window.
Because you don't have 20 years to figure out if you like the baker. Here's where it gets really interesting in the material. It highlights a phenomenon that occurs in these spaces called accelerated intimacy.
Accelerated intimacy, yes.
Because time is a finite resource in these transient communities,
Yeah.
people just completely throw out the standard social pleasantries.
They absolutely have to. The environment demands it.
Right. You meet someone at a coffee shop or a networking event for newcomers, or even just in the hallway of your apartment building. And within 2 weeks, this total stranger becomes your absolute closest confidant.
It happens incredibly fast.
It's wild. You go from, hi, nice to meet you, what do you do for work? To, here are my deepest childhood traumas, my crippling fear of failure, and my password to my streaming account in the blink of an eye.
It's intense, and what's fascinating here is the underlying psychological mechanism.
Like, why does this happen so predictably?
Exactly. Why do perfectly rational adults suddenly spill their guts to someone they met a week ago? It is, at its core, a functional necessity driven by stress.
Stress.
Yeah. People in these environments bond rapidly over shared, highly specific stressors. Sometimes we jokingly refer to it as trauma, and while it might not be, clinical trauma, it feels acutely threatening to the nervous system in the moment.
Threatening how? Like, what kind of stressors are we actually talking about here?
Well, think about the daily reality of a major relocation. navigating foreign bureaucracy.
Oh, the worst.
Right. Trying to figure out how to open a bank account when you don't speak the language, or when the banking system operates on a totally different logic than you're used to.
Yeah, or just trying to buy groceries.
Exactly. The daily, exhausting confusion of deciphering a local tax form or figuring out how the healthcare system works when you have a fever of 102. These are highly disorienting experiences that completely strip away your competence.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You suddenly feel like an infant.
You do.
I mean, you're an educated adult who can't figure out how to buy a train ticket. It's humiliating.
Precisely. It induces this massive state of vulnerability, and when your brain registers that vulnerability, it immediately seeks safety.
So you grab onto the nearest person.
You bond quickly with the first person who understands that specific stress, because you absolutely need a mutual support system just to survive the transition.
Yeah.
You find someone else who is also crying in the immigration office, and your brain says, an ally.
You know what this makes me think of? Let me see if I can articulate this. It's like, wait, no, it's like joining a reality TV show mid-season.
A reality show? Okay, walk me through that.
Yeah. Think about a show like Survivor or Big Brother.
Okay.
You get dropped onto an island or into a house with 20 complete strangers. The environment is inherently hostile, or at least deeply unfamiliar.
Right, the pressure is immediate.
You don't have time to ask people about their favorite color or what their favorite movies are, or politely feel out their political views over a leisurely 6-month period of grabbing coffees. The game is already moving.
The clock is ticking.
Exactly. The pressure is on. You have to figure out your alliances instantly to survive.
That's actually a very sharp parallel.
You're looking around going, okay, who has the map? Who knows how to start a fire? Who is going to watch my back at tribal council?
Or in the expat world, who knows how to get the Wi-Fi connected?
Yes. Who knows which doctor speaks English? You align with people not necessarily because you have a deep, soulful, cosmic connection, but because you are trapped in the exact same pressure cooker.
The pressure cooker forces vulnerability. That's the key here.
Vulnerability is a tool.
Exactly. In normal static society, vulnerability is something we parcel out slowly. It's a reward. We give a little bit of vulnerability to see if the other person handles it well.
And if they do, we open up a bit more.
Right. It's earned trust. But in the revolving door, vulnerability isn't a reward. It is the literal currency you use to buy immediate alliance.
Wow, currency.
You lead with your flaws and your panic because it's the fastest way to signal, I am safe and I need help.
But hold on, let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
I hear what you're saying about the currency of vulnerability, but is this actually real intimacy? Or is it just trauma bonding born entirely out of convenience?
That is the big question.
Like, I'm thinking about those reality TV alliances. As soon as they get off the island, they never speak again. Can a friendship that is formed purely out of the mutual panic of not understanding a local tax form actually last once the tax form is filed?
It's a very valid concern.
Once you both figure out the subway system, do you even have anything in common?
That is the central tension of accelerated intimacy. And it's a brilliant question to ask. Are these friendships authentic, or are they circumstantial mirages?
Right. Mirages.
The analysis we're looking at suggests that it's actually a complex hybrid. The catalyst for the connection might be shared stress and sheer convenience.
You just happen to be in the same waiting room.
Yes, you only talked to them because they were the only other person in the visa office. But the vulnerability required to navigate those humiliating, confusing situations, like admitting you're lost, crying over a rejected application, leaning on them when you're deeply homesick.
That stuff is real.
That creates genuine psychological closeness.
So the spark was circumstantial, but the fire is real.
Exactly. You have seen each other strip away the competent adult facade. Most of our friendships back in our hometowns are built on that facade.
Oh, for sure.
We show up to dinner parties looking put together. But in the revolving door, you skip the facade entirely. The feelings of reliance and trust are absolutely authentic.
Even if you don't actually share the same hobbies or background at all?
Right. You might have nothing in common on paper. One of you might be a 50-year-old corporate executive and the other a 22-year-old artist, but because you navigated that initial culture shock together, the bond is forged in iron.
That's incredible.
However, and this is the critical pivot in our deep dive, this intense, rapid-fire connection comes with a very heavy psychological price tag.
Because what goes up must come down.
Exactly.
If the first phase is this manic, rapid building of connections, this accelerated intimacy, we have to talk about what happens when that revolving door swings the other way.
When people leave.
Right. What happens when those instant best friends leave?
This is where the architecture of belonging starts to really show its structural flaws. The velocity of the arrivals is matched only by the velocity of the departures.
There is a really devastating case study in the sources that illustrates this perfectly. It focuses on a specific scenario: living in Tokyo as an expatriate.
A very classic revolving door hub.
Yeah. Imagine you're the learner listening to this. You've been living in Tokyo for a couple of years. You've gone through the crucible of accelerated intimacy. You've built this incredibly tight-knit group of friends.
You don't feel totally secure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have your favorite local spots. You have your weekend routines. And then March arrives.
March. And March, in the context of this specific community, is known as contract renewal season.
Contract renewal season, the end of the fiscal year, the end of the teaching contracts, the end of the corporate rotations.
The exodus.
Right. And suddenly, according to this scenario, half of your carefully curated social circle simply evaporates overnight.
Just gone.
They don't renew. They pack up their apartments, they sell their furniture online, and they fly back to London or Sydney or Chicago. Just like that, the entire infrastructure of your daily life is gone.
It's an emotional evaporation.
Right.
And it happens predictably, cyclically.
You know it's coming.
March is coming every single year. And the psychological fallout of this inevitable, repetitive goodbye is what we identify as the development of an emotional callus.
An emotional callus. Let's really dig into the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
I think everyone has a sense of what a callus is physically, but how does that actually map to our neurology and our social behavior?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human behavioral biology, a physical callus on your hand or your foot forms when there's repeated friction.
Right, like from playing guitar or lifting weights.
Exactly. The skin thickens, hardens, and deadens its nerve endings to protect the vulnerable soft tissue underneath from being torn open again. The emotional callus operates on the exact same physiological and psychological principle.
So it's a subconscious defense mechanism.
Yes, a defense against repetitive heartbreak.
Because it is heartbreaking. Losing a close friend, even one you've only known for a year, feels remarkably similar to a romantic breakup.
It's a grieving process.
You grieve the future you thought you were going to have with them. You grieve the inside jokes, the Tuesday night dinners.
It is a profound grief. And the human brain is, above all else, an efficiency machine.
It wants to save energy.
Exactly. It is designed to optimize for survival and minimize unnecessary energy expenditure. Prolonged grief requires a massive amount of cognitive and emotional energy. The brain does not like to experience it if it can avoid it.
Makes sense.
So to avoid the pain of constant, predictable goodbyes, individuals in these transient communities start to silently, subconsciously alter their behavior. They begin to hesitate.
Hesitate how? Give me a concrete example of what that looks like in real life.
Okay, let's say you've lived in this transient hub for 5 years. You've survived 5 marches. You've said goodbye to 30 people you loved.
It's just brutal.
You go to a party, and a new person enters the revolving door. They are bright, interesting, funny. They introduce themselves and say, I just moved here. I'm on a 1-year rotation for my company.
Oh, wow. I feel the stomach drop just hearing that 1-year rotation line.
Exactly. Your brain immediately does the math. You look at them and think, I know exactly how this ends. You're going to leave in 12 months.
I am going to help you pack boxes.
Right. I'm going to take you to the airport and then come back to an empty apartment. Why should I give you my energy? And so you politely pivot the conversation to the weather.
You just shut it down.
You don't ask for their number. You guard yourself.
Yeah. So it literally is emotional scar tissue. I completely see the logic of it. Your brain is trying to save you from future trauma. The callus protects you from the sheer friction of the loss.
It's very effective at that.
But, and let me push back on the viability of this as a long-term strategy, doesn't the callus also numb you to the joy of connection?
Oh, absolutely does.
If you're wearing thick, heavy leather work gloves so you don't get blisters, you are safe, yes. But you also can't feel the softness of whatever you're holding. You can't feel the warmth of another person's hand.
That is the tragic paradox of the emotional callus. It works too well. It doesn't just block out the pain of departure. It blocks out the depth of the connection entirely.
Which paints an incredibly bleak reality for people living this lifestyle long term.
It can be very lonely.
You end up in this bizarre, paradoxical situation where, on paper, your life looks incredibly vibrant.
Right. You're always busy.
You are constantly surrounded by a vast network of fascinating global acquaintances. You have a bustling social calendar. You go into dinner parties. You're at the networking events. You're tagged in photos online, looking like you're having the time of your life.
But internally, the landscape is completely barren.
Yes, you possess very few, if any, true anchors.
You are socially engaged, but you are emotionally isolated. You are skimming the surface of hundreds of relationships because diving deep has proven to be too dangerous.
You don't want to get hurt again.
You become a master of small talk, a master of being charming and helpful, but you don't let anyone into the inner sanctum.
For you listening right now, I want you to really reflect on this, because I don't think this is just limited to expats or global nomads.
No, it applies everywhere.
Think about your own life. Have you ever held back from getting to know someone simply because of the timeline? Maybe it was a summer intern at your office who sat at the desk next to you.
Or a neighbor who mentioned they were only renting for 6 months.
Exactly. Yeah. Or a classmate in a semester-long course.
It happens in corporate environments constantly, the high turnover departments.
Did you ever catch yourself thinking, they aren't going to be around long, it's really not worth the effort to ask them to grab coffee?
You justify it by saying you're too busy.
But really, it's the timeline. That right there, that tiny, almost imperceptible moment of withholding yourself, of choosing distance over engagement, that is the emotional callus at work.
And it's a perfectly natural response. But we have to look at the cumulative effect of it.
What happens over time?
When that callus thickens over years of transient living, when you continually reject deep connections to avoid goodbyes, you eventually realize you lack social anchors. And when you lack social anchors, something else begins to fracture.
It's not just your relationships.
No. Your physical sense of place begins to warp.
Yes, the very ground beneath your feet starts to feel unsteady. Because if you think about it, where do you actually stand when you aren't fully rooted to anyone or anywhere?
You start to feel geographically lost.
If your friends are a revolving door and your environment is temporary and your hometown feels like a distant memory, what is your actual coordinate on the map?
This brings us to one of the most vital concepts we'll discuss today in our deep dive. It's an anthropological term that perfectly encapsulates this warped sense of place.
This feeling of hovering.
Exactly. The term is liminality.
Liminality. It's a beautiful word, actually. It sounds like something fluid.
It derives from the Latin word limen, which literally translates to threshold.
A threshold. Like the literal doorway between two rooms.
Precisely. To be in a state of liminality is to be betwixt and between. In classical anthropology, it was often used to describe rites of passage.
Like becoming an adult.
Right. The phase where a boy is no longer a child, but not yet recognized as a man. He is in the threshold. But in the context of displacement and mobility, it describes a chronic state of being.
A permanent in-between.
It means you are no longer fully part of your original home culture.
Because you've changed too much.
Right. Your worldview has shifted. You've absorbed different political views, different paces of life, different values. You go back to where you were born, and the clothes don't quite fit anymore, metaphorically speaking.
You're an outsider in your own hometown.
But simultaneously, you are never fully inherently accepted into your new host culture.
Right, because you lack the childhood references. You didn't watch the same morning cartoons as everyone else.
You don't have the deep ancestral roots in that soil.
You might speak the language fluently, but you will always have a slight accent, or you won't understand a deeply ingrained cultural taboo until you accidentally break it.
So, if you don't belong in the room you left, and you are never fully allowed into the room you've entered, where are you?
You exist entirely in the doorway.
You are in the threshold.
The doorway. That is, honestly, it's a terrifying place to live permanently. The literature describes this as a ghost-like existence.
Ghost-like. Yes.
I find that so haunting. Think about what a ghost is. A ghost is an entity that is present, but incapable of physically affecting the world around it.
An observer.
You are an observer in both worlds, but a true participant in neither. You can look through the glass into the room of your past, and you can look into the room of your present, but you're just hovering in the frame.
You become a spectator to your own geography. It's a profound dissociation. You can mimic the customs of your host country.
You learn the rules.
You can learn to bow at the correct angle or kiss on both cheeks or navigate the complex social hierarchies of a new office. But there is always an invisible pane of glass between you and true, unthinking integration.
It's never effortless.
You are always translating your behavior. And conversely, When you return to your country of origin, you realize you no longer fit the mold they have kept warm for you. You have to translate your new self back into your old language.
You know what it feels like? Let me try to capture this feeling. It's like being perpetually stuck in the airport terminal of life.
The airport terminal. I like that. Expand on that imagery.
Well, think about the specific energy of an airport terminal, like the duty-free section past security.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You've passed through the checkpoints, meaning you've officially packed up, left your old life, your old home. You can't just turn around and walk back out the front doors easily.
Right, you're committed.
But you haven't boarded the plane to your actual new permanent destination yet. You were just wandering this massive, sterile concourse indefinitely.
Endless waiting.
The lighting is completely artificial, so you lose track of time. The food is temporary and overpriced. Everyone around you is rolling a suitcase, just passing through. Nobody lives in Terminal B. It's what you would call a non-place.
It's interesting you use that exact term. Sociologists and anthropologists actually refer to airports, hotel lobbies, and highway rest stops as non-places.
Wait, really? That's an actual term?
Yes. They are environments defined entirely by transit. They hold no organic history, no deep culture of their own. They're designed for movement, not for dwelling.
Right. So imagine your entire psychological state is trapped in Terminal B.
Yeah.
You're just walking past the giant perfume ads and the pretzel stands, waiting for something to happen.
But you never bored.
But let me challenge this for a second, because the ghost analogy and even my airport analogy, they both imply total paralysis.
That you're just stuck doing nothing.
Yeah. If you were just a ghost observing both worlds, or a passenger waiting at a gate, doesn't that make you completely passive? How does someone actively live a life? How do they wake up on a Tuesday, go to a demanding job, fall in love, raise kids, pay taxes, if they feel they're fundamentally just standing in a doorway?
It's a crucial distinction. They aren't paralyzed in the literal sense. They do all those things. They work, they date, they live, but they do it with a great deal of underlying invisible friction.
It takes more effort.
It requires immense cognitive load to constantly translate yourself. And this exact tension, the desire to live a full, active life while feeling fundamentally unrooted and betwixt and between, is what leads long-term travelers and expats to report a profound, pervasive feeling of chronic restlessness.
Chronic restlessness, like a hum in the background of your brain that never turns off.
Exactly.
Just an absolute inability to sit still and be present.
Because sitting still forces you to acknowledge the doorway. If you stop moving, you look down and realize you aren't standing on solid ground.
That's terrifying.
They cannot settle because they subconsciously feel they are always in transit. Going back to your airport analogy, when you are sitting at the gate in an airport terminal, your body is primed for the boarding announcement.
You can't fully relax.
You can't enter deep REM sleep in those uncomfortable chairs because your subconscious is listening for your flight number to be called over the loudspeaker.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
People living in the liminal space live their entire lives with that low-level adrenaline. They're constantly listening for a flight that is never called. They are waiting for the moment they will finally feel like they have arrived, but the arrival never happens.
That is utterly exhausting. To live decades of your life with your ear metaphorically tilted toward the loudspeaker.
It takes a huge toll.
So to cope with this chronic restlessness, to cope with the sheer exhaustion of being a ghost wandering the duty-free aisle of the world, we naturally look for ways to process the pain. And so often, human beings look to language.
Language is how we process reality.
We need to put a name to the ache. If we can name the monster in the closet, it becomes a little less scary.
Language is our primary tool for organizing chaos. It's how we tame our internal wilderness. If we can name an emotion, we can externalize it, we can study it, we can begin to manage it.
And the material we are reviewing introduces us to one of the most beautiful, haunting, and specific words I have ever come across.
It really is a special word.
It's a Welsh word, hiraeth.
Hiraeth. It is a concept that defies simple one-to-one translation in English, which is so often the case with words that describe the deepest, most complex human experiences.
Because English can be kind of blunt.
English sometimes lacks the vocabulary for profound existential melancholy.
So what does it actually mean, practically speaking? How do we define hiraeth?
At its surface level, hiraeth is defined as a deep, specific melancholy. It is a profound longing for a home that you cannot return to.
A home you can't go back to.
Or, even more devastatingly, a longing for a home that never truly existed in the first place. An idealized, romanticized version of the past that you have constructed in your memory.
So it's like nostalgia, but heavier. Because nostalgia is usually a warm feeling. You look at an old photo and smile.
Much heavier. Nostalgia etymologically implies an ache, but in modern usage, it is a fond looking back. You buy a retro t-shirt because of nostalgia. Right, it's fun.
High wraith is an active, painful, visceral grief. It is a yearning that physically hurts your chest. But what is most crucial here, and this is the most profound psychological insight we can draw from this concept, is the target of the grief. What are you actually missing?
Right, because usually we say we miss a place.
Exactly. But high wraith tells us that it is not just missing a physical geographic location. When you feel this ache, you are not just missing the specific mountains of your hometown, or the layout of the streets, or the smell of the bakery on the corner.
Then what is it?
The revelation is this. You are experiencing grief for the version of yourself that existed in that place.
Okay, let's stop and really look at that. I want to highlight this in bright neon for the listener. Grief for the lost self.
It changes everything.
That completely rewired my brain when I first read it. Because we always say, I miss New York, or I miss my college town, or I miss London. But we don't. We don't miss the subway delays or the overpriced rent. We miss who we were when we lived there.
Yes. We miss the optimism we had at 22. Or we miss the youth, the specific set of friends who made us feel invincible, the feeling that our whole life was ahead of us. We project the loss of our youth or the loss of a specific era of our lives onto the geography of the city.
You are mourning a temporal coordinate, not just a spatial one. You are mourning a time wrapped up in a place.
So let's explore the mechanics of this. What does this all mean for the concept of return? If I miss the city I lived in 10 years ago, and I'm feeling this intense, crushing high wraith, my instinct is to buy a plane ticket.
Which is the natural response.
But returning to that city won't actually cure the feeling, will it? Because the me who lived there is gone. The city is still there, the buildings are the same, the bakery is still selling the same bread, but the protagonist of the memory doesn't exist anymore.
You have hit on the exact tragic irony of high wraith. Returning to the physical place does not cure the disease. In fact, it almost always exacerbates the feeling. It makes the pain sharper.
Why? Because it proves that you can't go back.
Precisely. When you are far away, living in your new host country, you can sustain the comforting illusion that if things get too hard, if you get too tired of the liminal space, you could just buy a plane ticket and step right back into that old life.
It's a safety net in your mind.
It acts as a safety blanket. But when you actually return and you walk down that familiar street and you go to your favorite coffee shop, you feel the disparity between your past self and your present self.
The gap becomes obvious.
You sit in the coffee shop and you realize you have nothing in common with the people there anymore. Your old friends have moved on. They have inside jokes you don't understand. They have kids you haven't met. It becomes painfully, undeniably obvious that the past is a foreign country. You don't live there anymore.
Time and space are inextricably linked in our identity.
Yes. You cannot revisit a place without being confronted violently by the passage of time. The physical geography remains, but the temporal reality has shifted.
It's like trying to put on a coat that used to fit you perfectly when you were a kid.
That's a great metaphor.
You find it in the attic. You remember how warm and safe it made you feel, so you try to put it on. And you find out the sleeves are way too short, the shoulders are tight, you can't even button it, the coat hasn't changed, the coat is exactly the same as it was. But you have grown.
And you can't undo that growth.
The grief of high wraith is mourning the fact that you can never shrink yourself back down to be small enough to be warmed by that coat again. You have simply outgrown the space.
That is a beautiful, melancholic way to put it. You've outgrown the coat. And so we find ourselves at a critical juncture in our exploration.
We've painted quite a picture.
Let's look at the portrait we've painted of the highly mobile individual. They are standing in the doorway of liminality, unable to enter either room fully.
Right.
They are wearing the thick emotional callus they built to survive the revolving door of accelerated intimacy and constant goodbyes. And they're carrying the heavy, unresolvable grief of high wraith for the past versions of themselves.
It sounds incredibly heavy. Honestly, it sounds like a recipe for depression.
It is the ultimate psychological crisis of the mobile life. It is the wall that every long-term expat, immigrant, or nomad eventually hits.
So what do?
It leads to an unavoidable existential question. Is the only solution to just stop moving? If mobility causes this fracturing of identity, if it causes this chronic restlessness and grief, should we all just go back to where we started, give up the global dream, and settle down in one place forever?
Right. Just plant our feet, throw away the suitcase, burn the passport, and say, I am never leaving this zip code again. I'm going to buy a house, plant an oak tree, and never speak to someone with a different accent.
Is that the answer?
But everything we've read is very clear on this. That is not the solution.
It is, in fact, an impossible solution. You cannot unring a bell. The literature refers to global living, or even just moving away from your hometown, as a Pandora's box.
Once it's open, it's open.
Once you expose your mind to the vastness of the world, to different ways of thinking, different cultures, different political systems, you cannot unsee it. You cannot force the lid shut and pretend you are the same person who never left.
Your brain has been completely rewired.
Rewired by the exposure. If you try to force yourself into a static, immobile life after experiencing the world, the chronic restlessness will only amplify until it breaks you.
So we are trapped. If we can't go backward, because we've outgrown the code, and we can't stay frozen in the doorway as ghosts forever because it's exhausting, how on earth do we move forward?
You need a new way to belong.
Exactly. Where do we find belonging if geography is no longer an option?
The actual solution, the path forward out of the liminal space, lies in the intentional creation of what sociologists call micro-communities.
Micro-communities.
Yeah.
Okay, let's break this down, because this feels like the life raft we've been looking for.
To understand the micro-community, we have to look at how humans traditionally sought belonging. Historically, we sought belonging on a macro level.
Big groups.
Right. We wanted to belong to a nation. We wanted to belong to a massive, organized religion. We wanted to belong to a vast ancestral homeland with thousands of years of history. We wanted to be part of a giant collective.
Because that felt safe.
But when you are a product of displacement, those macro categories no longer fit.
Because your identity is too fragmented.
Exactly. It's too intersectional. You might have an Italian passport, but you grew up in Dubai and you went to college in the United States, and now you work in Singapore. What macro category do you belong to?
None of them.
Or all of them, which effectively means none. Therefore, instead of looking for an entire nation or an entire city to belong to, you must radically shrink the scale of your search. You must find your tribe.
Your specific granular people.
Yes. A micro-community isn't necessarily geographically bound, and it isn't based on where you were born. It is based on shared, highly specific present realities.
Like shared interests.
Yeah. It could be a digital community of people who share your exact niche professional interests scattered across 10 time zones. It could be a highly specific local hobby group, say, a local pottery class, or a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym, or a group of weekend bird watchers.
There, the hobby is the glue.
Exactly, where the shared passion completely supersedes cultural or national background. Or it could literally just be 2 or 3 specific individuals who deeply, fundamentally understand your specific brand of displacement.
So instead of trying to blend into the entire forest and wondering why you look different than the pines and the birches, you just look around and find the 3 other trees that grew at the exact same weird, crooked angle as you.
That's a fantastic way to put it. You stop trying to be part of the forest, and you curate a custom ecosystem. You handpick the elements of your belonging.
I love this concept so much. It makes me think of an analogy that totally flips the script on how we talk about roots. Let's hear it. If the old way of belonging, the macro way, was like trying to plant a massive, centuries-old oak tree with deep, deep, immovable roots in one specific plot of land, this new way, the micro-community way, is like carrying a terrarium with you.
A terrarium, a self-contained ecosystem.
Yeah. Think about a beautiful glass jar. You meticulously pick the exact right soil. You find the specific type of moss you like. You plant the exact little ferns that thrive together in that specific humidity.
Very curated.
And you carry that glass jar with you wherever you go. Whether you set the jar down on a desk in Tokyo, or a coffee table in London, or a windowsill in Ohio, the ecosystem inside the jar is perfectly stable and completely yours. You build what the concept calls a floating village.
The floating village. It is arguably one of the most powerful and liberating concepts we will discuss today, because what the floating village does is it radically redefines the very concept of stability for the modern human.
How so? Walk me through the redefinition.
For millennia, stability was defined geometrically and geographically. Think about castles, walls, property lines, a physical house, a plot of land that your grandfather owned.
Physical assets.
If the land didn't move, you were stable. If you stayed put, you were safe. But the floating village completely shifts the paradigm. In a highly mobile world, stability is no longer defined as a physical place.
What is it then?
Stability is a highly curated, highly mobile network of people, shared interests, and internal routines. Your stability is relational, not spatial.
My stability is relational, not spatial.
Yeah, that is huge.
It changes everything.
So if I have my 3 best friends on a group chat who I talk to every day, and I have my weekly digital book club that meets over video call, and I have my running shoes and my morning meditation routine, I am completely 100% stable. Even if I'm sitting in the middle of that Florissant airport terminal we talked about earlier, my terrarium is intact.
Precisely. You are carrying your roots with you. They aren't buried in the dirt anymore. They are airborne roots, like an orchid. An orchid. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Orchids pull their nutrients right out of the air. They don't need soil to thrive. They just need the right environment and support.
Exactly.
But wait, I have to ask the logical next question. If our stability is now this floating network, this airborne orchid, this terrarium we carry with us, how does that fundamentally change how we view ourselves in the mirror?
Identity is the final piece of the puzzle.
Because our identities used to be tied to our geography. I'm John from Ohio. I'm Emma from London. If I'm no longer defined by the dirt I stand on, who am I?
This leads us to the final and perhaps most liberating paradigm shift we need to explore today, the adoption of the multilocal identity.
The multilocal identity. This is the ultimate reframe. We are moving from the physical to the psychological.
It is a cognitive reframing of the highest order. For so long, the discourse around moving, migration, and displacement has been framed around what is lost.
Which is exactly how we usually talk about it. Even in this conversation, we've talked about grief. We say, I lost my hometown. I don't have a home. I left my friends behind.
Exactly. We use the language of deprivation. We use the language of a deficit. But the multilocal identity demands that we actively start framing the experience of displacement as a loss of home.
We have to flip it.
It requires us to view this experience not as a subtraction, but as a massive expansion of the soul. We are not homeless. We are multilocal.
We are not homeless. We are multilocal. Okay, let's dive into the neurological and psychological power of this reframing. Because words matter. How we label our experience dictates how our brain processes it.
Words dictate our reality. The term homeless or displaced or unrooted, in the existential sense, operates entirely on a mindset of scarcity.
It sounds like a problem to be solved.
It tells your brain, I have nowhere, I am lacking, I am missing a fundamental human requirement. When your brain hears that, it triggers anxiety. It triggers the fight or flight response.
And panic sets in.
It triggers that chronic restlessness we discussed, the feeling of the ghost in the doorway.
Right, it's a threat state.
But the term multilocal shifts the narrative instantly at a neurological level to one of abundance. It tells your brain, I don't have nowhere, I have everywhere. It acknowledges that you have not lost a single home, but rather you have collected pieces of the world.
You've collected pieces. Like picking up stones on different beaches.
Yes. You lived in Tokyo, so you collected the appreciation for the cherry blossoms, the deep respect for public order, and the efficiency of the transit system. You lived in London, so you collected the pub culture, the dry humor, and the historical weight of the architecture.
And maybe you grew up in Ohio.
Right, so you collected the open skies, the directness of the people, and the comfort of a sprawling backyard. And rather than viewing those pieces as scattered fragments of a broken life, leaving you feeling fractured and confused, the multilocal identity posits that those pieces now live entirely, cohesively, and beautifully inside you.
You become the map. You are the mosaic of everywhere you've been.
Exactly. You are the sole curator of this unique internal geography. No one else on Earth has the exact same combination of pieces that you do.
Okay, I love the poetry of this, but I have to push back on this. Because I can hear the learner at home, especially the one who is currently really struggling with homesickness or feeling isolated in a new city, thinking this right now.
Push back. Let's hear it.
Is multilocal just a really clever psychological semantic trick? Does changing the label on the jar actually change what's inside?
It's a fair question.
Does calling myself multilocal actually ease the sting of that emotional callus we talked about earlier? When my friend leaves in March, does saying I'm multilocal make it hurt less? Does it cure the deep, aching grief of higher-eighth when I miss who I was 10 years ago?
It's a very fair, very necessary challenge. And the honest, unvarnished psychological synthesis of everything we've looked at is no. It does not erase the grief.
It doesn't fix the pain.
The grief of goodbyes, the ache of nostalgia, the exhaustion of the liminal space, those are fundamental parts of the human condition when you choose to move. A semantic shift, no matter how clever, cannot act as an anesthetic for the pain of loving people who live far away. If you love widely, you will grieve widely.
So what's the point of the reframe then? If it doesn't cure the pain, why bother doing the cognitive work to call myself multilocal?
Because it doesn't erase the grief, but it gives the grief profound meaning. And in human psychology, meaning is everything.
Meaning is the difference between surviving and despairing.
Yes, Viktor Frankl taught us this. Pain without meaning is simply suffering. It is useless, destructive agony. But pain with meaning is a sacrifice for a greater good. It is a toll you are willing to pay.
A toll on the bridge.
The multilocal mindset allows you to look at the grief of Hiraeth, or the sadness of a friend leaving the revolving door, and say, I hurt right now because I have loved widely. I ache because my life is incredibly vast.
That's powerful.
The richness of possessing multiple pieces of the world, the incredibly broad perspective it affords you, the deep empathy you gain for different cultures and different ways of living, that is a wealth that staying entirely in one comfortable, static place can never provide.
You are paying a very high emotional tax, but you are living in a much bigger, much more magnificent mansion.
Precisely. The grief is simply the toll you pay on the bridge to a broader consciousness. When you reframe it that way, the pain doesn't go away, but it becomes something you can bear with pride. It becomes proof of your expansion, not proof of your brokenness.
I want to connect this directly to you, the listener, right now. Wherever you are, whatever room you are sitting in, take a second and look around. Or think about the food you like to cook on a Tuesday night. Think about the specific phrases or slang you use when you talk to your friends.
Look at the details of your life.
How many of those habits, those physical objects on your shelf, those linguistic quirks, are pieces of the world you've collected? Things you picked up from people you've met, from places you've visited, from communities you've passed through.
Maybe you drink a specific type of yerba mate because of a roommate you had 5 years ago who's from Argentina.
Right. Maybe you take your shoes off at the door because you lived in Asia for 6 months. Maybe you use a specific phrase because an old coworker from the South used to say it, and it just stuck with you.
Those are not fragments of a broken, scattered identity. They are the building blocks of a robust, multilocal self.
That is the multilocal identity in practice. You aren't lost. You are a walking, breathing museum of every connection you ever made in every city that has ever touched you.
Which brings the entire scope of our exploration into focus. We can clearly see the architecture now.
We really can. Let's recap the journey we've been on today because we have covered some massive psychological and emotional terrain.
It's been quite a deep dive.
We started by navigating the incredibly turbulent waters of transient friendships. We step into the revolving door where accelerated intimacy forces us to trade vulnerability for survival, bypassing small talk to build life rafts out of shared stress.
We then examine the inevitable, painful fallout of that velocity, the emotional callus we subconsciously build to survive the constant goodbyes, and the tragic paradox of being surrounded by a global network but lacking deep, anchoring roots.
From there, we stepped into the doorway. We explored the threshold of liminality, that exhausting, ghost-like existence of being betwixt and between cultures, wandering the airport terminal of life.
Waiting for a flight.
We finally learned to put a name to our deepest nostalgia, using the beautiful Welsh word hiraeth, to understand that we are often grieving for a lost version of ourselves, not just a place on a map. We realized we outgrew the coat.
And ultimately, we rejected the idea of passive suffering. We realized we can't force Pandora's box closed. Instead, we learned how to redefine our stability by building floating villages and curating our micro-communities.
We took back control.
We shifted our cognitive framework from the anxious scarcity of homelessness to the abundant, rich reality of a multilocal identity.
It is deeply empowering. It takes the absolute murkiness of human connection, the anxiety of moving, the fear of losing touch, and gives it a sturdy, manageable structure.
It definitely does.
But before we let you go back to your day, folding that laundry or working to your new office, our expert has one final provocative thought for you to take with you.
Throughout this entire discussion, if you look closely at the underlying tensions we've been exploring, we've essentially been circling around two massive opposing human drives. Let's call them roots and wings.
Roots and wings,
Yeah.
the ultimate tug of war.
Yes. Roots represent the profound human need for stability, the deep history of ancestry, the comfort of the familiar, and the immovable anchoring of a single physical place.
And wings?
Wings, on the other hand, represent the equally profound human drive for freedom, the compulsion to explore, the desire to learn, and the expansion of the multilocal soul. My final philosophical question for you to ponder as you step back into your life is this. Is it actually possible to possess both simultaneously?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Can you truly be deeply, immovably grounded in your roots while actively, passionately flying? Or does the very nature of flight demand that you must always leave the ground and a piece of yourself behind?
Can you be grounded while flying? That is a question that could keep you awake at night for years. And it brings us right back to where we started. We wanted a clean X-ray. We wanted a simple binary diagnosis that said, you belong exactly here, or you belong exactly there.
But life isn't binary.
The truth is, the architecture of belonging isn't built with concrete and steel and doesn't show up on a scan. It's built with memories, shared vulnerabilities, floating villages, and the immense courage required to exist in the murky, beautiful in-between. Thank you so much for joining us in the liminal space today. Keep exploring your world, keep collecting those pieces for your terrarium, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.